Hi, enjoy listening. The entire town of Ashgrove buzzed with only one topic: the upcoming wedding of Garrett Whitmore, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the region. And a girl no one seemed to know, a quiet bank clerk with no family, no fortune, and no past. Every local newspaper, radio host, and gossip column in town ran breathless updates. The cost of the floral arrangements, the lease on the grandest hall in the state, the designer wedding dress flown in from Paris. Even the wedding menu had been leaked. Truffle-crusted lamb, saffron risotto, and an open bar with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Everyone was talking, and everyone was invited. Well, almost everyone. The guests were strictly from Garrett's side: politicians, business tycoons, even a retired senator or two. There were no family or friends from the bride's side. And that's what made it all the more surprising. Why would the Whitmores, generous, powerful, and notoriously selective, agree to such a match? Those who truly knew the Whitmores understood the answer. Joel and Margaret Whitmore had once been simple farmhands in rural Kentucky. They'd clawed their way up from nothing, turning a single gas station into a real estate empire. They respected hard work and resilience. And the girl their son had chosen, a young woman named April, was the very definition of both. April Maddox was a mystery to most, but to Joel and Margaret, she was familiar. They saw in her a reflection of their own past. She'd grown up in a foster home outside of Nashville. April never knew her mother, and the only thing she remembered of her father was a soft voice and a warm hug on her 5th birthday, the day he never came back. One of the older house mothers at the group home once told her the story. Her father had gone north for work, and her stepmother had quietly given her up to the system soon after. Despite it all, April was a bright child, quick to learn, eager to help, always polite. She taught herself to read early and was doing multiplication by the time other kids were learning the alphabet. Teachers predicted she'd go far, and they were right. After high school, she took online classes and worked long shifts as a bank receptionist. With no one to rely on, she supported herself. She didn't complain. She didn't draw attention, but she didn't go unnoticed. One autumn morning, Garrett Whitmore walked into her branch to close a dormant trust account. He was used to assistants and glass offices, but something about the soft-spoken young woman behind the counter stopped him cold. Her deep blue eyes, the graceful way she spoke, it stunned him. He fumbled his paperwork. She smiled. "Let me help you with that," she said, her voice a soothing breeze. He walked out of the bank dazed, the memory of her voice playing on loop in his head. Days passed. He couldn't shake her image. A week later, he was back, this time with no banking business at all. "I'd like to speak with someone," he said, cheeks slightly flushed, About something personal. April blinked at him, a little surprised. He continued quickly. I was wondering if you'd have dinner with me. Just dinner. She gave him a kind smile and shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't date clients. It's a rule here. Garrett was disappointed, but not deterred. Every evening for the next 3 weeks, a deliveryman arrived with a small bouquet and a card. No name, just a little red heart sticker. Her co-workers swooned. April blushed, and one day Garrett himself arrived, with a bouquet in one hand and a red velvet box in the other. Right there in the bank lobby, in front of her co-workers and confused customers, he knelt on one knee. I don't want to scare you, he said, but I know what I feel, and I've never been more sure of anything in my life. April's face went pale. We don't even know each other, she whispered. Then let's start today, Garrett replied. They spent the rest of that evening walking through the city, trading stories about their childhoods. April eventually told him the truth about the foster home, the loneliness, the years of silence from her family. She expected him to walk away, but Garrett held her hand tighter. Then I'll love you twice as much for the family who didn't. 2 weeks later, she said yes. April asked for a quiet wedding, maybe something small in a park, just the two of them. But Joel and Margaret wouldn't hear of it. He's our only son, Margaret insisted. And he's marrying the woman he loves. It has to be perfect. So began the whirlwind. April barely had time to breathe as planners fussed over seating charts and tastings. She stayed quiet, letting the Whitmores plan the celebration. She hadn't even invited anyone. There was no one to invite. But someone else had been watching, from far away, from the fringes of town. A man with silver in his beard and sadness in his eyes. He didn't own a phone. He didn't own much of anything. But he had seen her picture, and he recognized the eyes. His name was Walter Maddox, and nothing, no distance, no years. The day of the wedding arrived in a blaze of gold and spring wind. The sprawling Whitmore estate on the edge of Ashgrove had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Strings of white lights shimmered from the trees. A live quartet played under a rose-draped gazebo, and valets in pressed uniforms opened the doors of glistening black cars for guests who wore tuxedos and designer gowns. It was a celebration fit for royalty, but Walter Maddox stood across the street, hidden under the shadow of a rusted bus shelter. His old brown coat hung loose on his frame, and his shoes had holes in both soles. A faded beanie covered his salt and pepper hair. In his hands, clutched close to his chest, was a small box, wrapped in the brown paper of a grocery bag, tied with twine. Inside was all he had to offer, a single brooch. Not just any brooch. It had belonged to April's mother, Alice. He'd kept it for over 2 decades, hidden deep in an old cigar box under loose floorboards in a trailer he once called home. The last thing Alice had touched before she was rushed to the hospital. The last thing Walter had saved before grief took everything else. He didn't have an invitation. He didn't have clean clothes, but he had to try. He crossed the road slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his worn boots. As he approached the gates, two security guards in sharp black suits stepped forward, forming a wall of muscle and suspicion. "Sorry, sir," one said, glancing him up and down. "This is a private event." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Walter said softly. "I just need to speak to the bride." The guards exchanged looks, already bored. "Nobody gets in without clearance. Guests only. You'll need to move along." "She's my daughter," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. The taller of the two laughed once, dryly. "Sure she is, old man. Half the town's claiming that today. Look, I'm not going to call the cops, but you need to go." Walter's shoulders slumped. He stepped back, apologizing under his breath. I need 5 minutes." But they weren't listening anymore. He turned and shuffled away, stopping beneath a large oak near the parking lot. He leaned against it, the rough bark pressing into his back, and slowly slid down until he was sitting in the grass. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his coat. He hadn't come all this way to be turned around by two suits at the gate. April was getting married just beyond those trees. He could hear laughter and music drifting from the lawn. She was in there, his little girl, the baby he'd fed formula to in the middle of the night, the toddler who had curled up against his chest and fallen asleep, listening to his heartbeat. And she didn't even know he was alive. He'd lost her once already, to a cruel twist of fate, to a mistake that still haunted him. He remembered the day he left, how Alice had begged him not to take the job in the north, not to leave April behind with Mary, his second wife. But they were behind on rent, and he thought it was only temporary. Just a few months of hard labour. He didn't know how fast things would unravel. The accident, the arrest, the prison sentence, the divorce papers that arrived without warning. By the time he got out, years had passed, and every trace of April had vanished into the system. He didn't know where to look. No one would tell him. And now, after all these years, he had found her, Alice's eyes. The next morning, Walter pawned the only things of value he had, a pocket watch and a ratchet set, and took a bus to Ashgrove. Now he sat under the tree, clutching the box, his legs aching and his pride shattered. He didn't belong in this world of silk and silverware, but he couldn't just leave. Maybe fate wasn't done with him yet. Then, just as the sun dipped slightly in the sky and the guards disappeared inside, summoned by a burst pipe or a misbehaving groomsman, he didn't know which, Walter saw his chance. He stood. He crossed the lawn slowly, deliberately, the box in his hands. Inside the grand ballroom, laughter echoed through vaulted ceilings. Guests clinked champagne glasses. Waiters in white jackets glided between tables, and the scent of lilies and roasted duck filled the air. April stood near the head table, her hand lightly resting on Garrett's arm. She wore an ivory gown, simple but elegant. The kind of dress she never dared to imagine as a girl. Her hair was swept back, a single pearl pin at the nape of her neck. She had never looked more radiant or more uneasy. She scanned the room every few minutes, as if searching for someone she couldn't name. Garrett leaned closer. "You okay?" She gave him a tight smile. "Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Something feels unfinished." Before he could reply, the NC took the microphone and announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the couple to open their wedding gifts." A murmur of excitement rolled through the crowd as servers brought forward a large, glass-topped table, already piled with wrapped boxes and satin envelopes. One by one, April and Garrett unwrapped engraved silver platters, monogrammed towels, designer watches, each followed by polite applause and camera flashes. Then came the last gift, a small, rough box. No ribbon, no name. April reached for it instinctively, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Her fingers hesitated at the twine. Something about it felt different, older, familiar. As she untied it and peeled away the brown paper, her breath caught. Inside, resting on a faded cloth, was a brooch. An antique oval piece, gold-framed with a nest of small, brilliant diamonds encircling a rose-shaped sapphire in the center. Time had dulled the clasp, but the gems still shimmered. She gasped so sharply the room seemed to pause. Garrett touched her elbow. "What is it?" April's hands began to tremble. This was my mother's." Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence everyone heard. "Her mother used to wear it on Sundays." April could remember the way the light caught it when she bent to kiss her forehead goodnight. "How?" she began, but the rest of the sentence never came. April stepped away from the table, scanning the crowd, heart pounding. "He's here," she said. "He must be here." "Who?" Garrett asked. "My father." The name, the word, felt foreign in her mouth. A word she hadn't spoken aloud since she was 5 years old. The crowd parted slowly as April, still holding the brooch, walked through the ballroom, eyes darting. And then she saw him. He stood near the back wall, half shadowed by a pillar, awkward and out of place in his worn coat. His eyes were damp, his posture slouched, but unmistakable hope flickered across his weathered face when she looked at him. She knew, instantly. April didn't care that her dress was dragging. She didn't care about the stunned whispers or the judgmental glances. She broke into a run, the brooch clutched tightly in one hand. "Dad!" she cried. Walter's breath left his lungs. He opened his arms, just in time for her to throw herself against his chest. They held each other in a tight, trembling embrace, the kind only time and pain could forge. for the first time in 20 years. April felt like a child again. Loved, protected, wanted. The room fell into complete silence. Guests who had moments ago been discussing real estate and political campaigns now looked away, discreetly wiping tears from their eyes. Joel and Margaret Whitmore exchanged a long glance. Margaret touched her husband's arm gently. Let them be. Garrett, near the head table, stood frozen. And then, slowly, he smiled. The ballroom faded away. April didn't notice the chandelier overhead or the guests shifting in their seats. Her world had narrowed to one moment, standing in her wedding gown, in the arms of the man she thought she'd lost forever. Walter held her gently, afraid she might disappear again if he squeezed too tightly. His beard scratched her temple as he pressed a trembling kiss to her hair. "I found you," he whispered. April pulled back, just enough to look into his face. She touched his cheek, barely believing. "I waited. I used to dream about you walking through the door." "I wanted to," he said hoarsely. "I tried." Her throat tightened. "Where have you been?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper, a wedding clipping from the Ash Grove Gazette. Her photo stared up at her from the black and white print. "I saw this last week. The eyes, April. I knew they were yours, same as your mother's." At the mention of her mother, April blinked away sudden tears. She glanced at the brooch, still cradled in her palm. "You gave this to me that night before you left." Walter nodded slowly. "Your mother wore it the day she married me. It was passed down from her grandmother. She said you should have it one day, but when I came back and you were gone, I hid it. I couldn't bear to look at it." "I don't understand," April said. "Why didn't you come for me?" Walter took a shaky breath and looked down. "It's a long story." She pulled him gently by the arm. "Then let's find somewhere to sit." Joel Whitmore appeared beside them as they stepped toward the exit. His tailored tuxedo and silver cufflinks contrasted sharply with Walter's threadbare coat. But his expression was warm, welcoming. "You must be April's father," Joel said, offering his hand. Walter hesitated before shaking it. "Walter Maddox. I'm Joel. You've got a strong daughter. We're proud to have her in the family." Walter's eyes moistened again. "I'm proud just to see her smile." Joel leaned in and said quietly, "There's a side parlour down the hall, private. Take all the time you need." April mouthed a grateful "thank you" before leading Walter out of the ballroom. The parlour was quiet and sunlit. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a rose garden. April and Walter sat side by side on a tufted velvet couch, the brooch lying between them like a fragile bridge to the past. "I was supposed to be gone 3 months," Walter began, fingers knotted in his lap. "A construction job in Michigan. Paid well. Your stepmother, Mary, she wasn't thrilled about watching you, but I thought it would be fine. April said nothing. She vaguely remembered Mary's cold silences, the way toys disappeared from her room after her father left. But there was a fight, Walter continued, his voice growing softer. At the job site. I'd had a beer. Some other guy got hurt. It was an accident, but he was the boss's nephew. He paused, jaw clenched. They made an example of me. I spent 6 years in prison. April stared at him. 6 years. I wrote to Mary. Every month. I begged to know how you were. Never heard back. I didn't even know she'd given you up. Tears spilled down April's cheeks. I thought you left me. Walter let out a long, painful breath. I never wanted that. When I got out, everything was gone. Mary had vanished. The adoption records were sealed. No one would tell me where you'd gone. April reached for his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, familiar. I looked for you until I ran out of money, he added. Then I started drinking. I didn't think I deserved to find you. But I kept the brooch. I kept it because it was the only proof that you've ever been mine. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I never forgot you, she whispered. They sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light through the windows. Outside, the wedding celebration carried on, but in this room, time had paused. I'm sorry I missed so much, Walter finally said. Your birthdays, your graduation, today. You didn't miss today, April said softly. You made it. He looked down at her. You've forgiven me. April smiled through her tears. I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know if you were real. Garrett noticed the empty seat beside April just before the cake was rolled in. The band had started up again. The dance floor was full, and guests were enjoying the endless stream of food and fine wine. But April wasn't back yet. He'd seen her slip away with the older man in the worn coat nearly an hour ago. No one had asked questions. Everyone knew. Or at least, they understood enough not to intrude. Garrett glanced toward the hallway again, then stood and made his way to the side parlour. He paused at the open door. April was sitting on the couch with her father, head resting against his shoulder. Both of them silent, their faces streaked with dried tears. Neither noticed him at first, and Garrett didn't want to interrupt. But April turned her head and saw him. She smiled and motioned for him to come in. Walter stood instinctively, straightening his back as Garrett entered. You must be Garrett. I am, sir, Garrett said, extending a hand. It's good to meet you. Walter shook it firmly, his eyes searching the younger man's face. Thank you for taking care of her. She takes care of me just as much, Garrett said with a small smile. Maybe more. April stood beside them, looking between the two men, the past and the future. She reached for Walter's arm. Dad, come join us, please. He looked down at his clothes, at his beat-up boots. I'm not dressed for something like this. "You're dressed as my father," April said. "That's all that matters." He hesitated, torn between pride and shame. But Garrett stepped in again. "My parents will want to meet you," he said. "And besides, the food's getting cold." Walter laughed softly, a dry, surprised sound, as if he hadn't heard himself laugh in years. "I guess I could eat," he said, voice low. Back in the ballroom, guests looked up as April returned with Garrett and the mystery man in the brown coat. Whispers rose again, but no one said anything unkind. Something had shifted. The laughter was warmer now, the smiles more genuine. Joel and Margaret Whitmore stood and greeted Walter with quiet grace. Margaret didn't hesitate to hug him, and Joel offered a chair beside them at the head table. "Family sits up front," he said. "That's the rule." Walter, clearly overwhelmed, nodded in thanks and sat carefully, as if afraid the moment might still vanish. The waiter appeared, unsure, glancing between April and Garrett. Garrett leaned over and said, "Bring him the best we've got, and keep it coming." April turned to her father and placed the brooch carefully in front of him on a cloth napkin. "Do you want to pin it on me?" she asked. His eyes welled again. "Are you sure?" "I want to wear it for the rest of the evening," she said softly. "For her, for you, for everything we lost and found again." With trembling fingers, Walter pinned the brooch near the neckline of her dress. It shimmered in the candlelight, radiant and full of memory. Then April reached for his hand. "You're staying with us tonight." "I don't want to impose." "You're not. You're coming home." The band began to play the couple's first dance. Garrett stood and offered his hand to April. She took it, her father watching as she walked to the center of the dance floor with the man she had chosen to build her future with. Walter watched her turn, watched her smile, watched her close her eyes and rest her head against her husband's shoulder. And for the first time in 23 years, he felt peace. The house was quiet when they got home. The newlyweds had chosen not to spend the night in a hotel suite or jet off to some exotic island. April had insisted, "Let's start our life right here in our home, together, no fanfare." Garrett had agreed, knowing her heart had already taken more than enough turns that day. April unlocked the door and stepped into the soft glow of the foyer light. Behind her, Walter hesitated on the porch. She turned. "Come on, Dad." He stepped inside slowly, almost reverently, like a man entering a church. His eyes swept across the framed photos on the wall, the worn leather sofa, the bookshelves filled with novels and cookbooks and travel guides. "This is beautiful," he said. "You built a life here." "We did," April said, her voice proud and warm. "But it always felt like something or someone was missing." Garrett carried a folded blanket and a pillow down from the hallway closet. You can take the guest room, he offered. Second door on the left. Fresh sheets. Bathrooms right across. Walter nodded, grateful but visibly uneasy. You okay? April asked gently. Walter cleared his throat. I haven't been in a house like this in a long time. Most nights I sleep at the shelter, sometimes in the park. Don't worry, I clean up when I can. Later that night, April sat on the edge of her bed, still in her wedding slip, brushing her hair out slowly. Garrett leaned against the doorframe, watching her with quiet affection. He's asleep, he said, passed out like a rock. She smiled faintly. Good. You okay? I think so, she said. Just trying to understand how today was even real. That brooch, it opened everything. I saw it on you tonight. You looked different wearing it. Whole. She turned to him, eyes soft. I think I needed to see him as a person, not just a ghost in my past. I never stopped loving him, even when I was angry. But I didn't know if I'd ever see him again, or if I'd even want to. And now I want to know everything, she whispered. Why he left, where he went, how he survived. I want the pieces filled in. Garrett came over and sat beside her, taking her hand. You've got time now, he said. Time to heal, to forgive, to rebuild. She rested her head against his shoulder. Do you think people can really change? Garrett thought for a moment. Some don't, but some do, especially when there's something or someone to come back for. She nodded, and silence settled between them like a soft blanket. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. In the guest room, Walter slept more deeply than he had in years, and in April's heart, a door long closed had finally creaked open. April sat across from her father at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The morning light spilled through the windows, casting a golden hue across the quiet kitchen. The events of the day before, the wedding, the reunion, the brooch, still felt unreal, like fragments from a dream. Walter looked different in the daylight. Older, yes, but there was a softness to him now. His face had lost some of the guarded tension from the night before, as if the warmth of the home had begun to seep into his bones. Garrett had gone to pick up groceries, giving them time alone. So, April said, breaking the silence gently, where did you go all those years? Walter sighed and set his coffee cup down slowly. That's a long story. I've got time. He nodded. The day I left, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. I'd lost my job, and your mother and I had been fighting a lot. Money was tight. I thought if I could just get away for a little while, find work out of state, I could send money back, fix everything. But one bad break led to another. I got into a car accident outside of Dayton. No ID, no insurance. I woke up in a clinic with no wallet and a head full of fog. You didn't try to call? April asked, her voice trembling. I wanted to, but when I finally made it to a payphone 2 weeks later, I called the old number. It had been disconnected. I tried your mother's sister too. Nothing. And after a while, I started telling myself it was better for you both if I didn't come back. That I'd only make things worse. He paused, eyes clouding over. But the truth is, I was ashamed of the mess I'd made. I thought you'd moved on. April blinked back tears. We didn't. I figured that out too late, he said softly. I tried to come back once, about 4 years ago. I made it to the outskirts of town, but I saw your mother outside the house with some man. I didn't reckon. They both fell quiet. I found the brooch about a year after I lost everything, he said after a moment. At a pawn shop in Pittsburgh. I knew it wasn't worth much, but it reminded me of your mum. She had something similar once. I thought if I ever saw you again, maybe I'd give it to you. It was the only thing I had left to offer. April reached across the table and took his hand. It wasn't about the brooch. It was about the man behind it. Walter looked down, tears swimming in his tired eyes. I'm not asking you to forget, he said hoarsely, or to pretend I didn't fail you. I want to be here now, if you'll let me. April's voice shook, but it was steady with conviction. You already are. I can't change the past, Dad, but I want to believe in a future. One where we don't lose each other again. The clock ticked in the stillness, and outside a sparrow landed on the window ledge, chirping once before flying off. Walter looked up at her and gave a slight nod. Then I'll do everything I can to stay. The days passed gently, like a slow-moving stream after a summer storm. April settled into married life with Garrett, and yet every day now carried another quiet miracle. Her father, Walter, still in the house, still trying. At first he moved through the home like a shadow, careful not to overstep. But April had made it clear. You belong here. You're not a guest, you're family. In the mornings, they shared coffee. In the afternoons, April would sit beside him in the sunroom, both with books open. Sometimes reading, sometimes just silently enjoying the nearness. And at night, Garrett often found April curled on the couch beside Walter, listening to stories of his youth. Things she'd never heard before. How he met her mother at a high school dance. How he dreamed of opening a small car repair shop with a friend from college. How life had slowly, painfully pulled him in other directions. You were funny back then, April teased one night. I still am, Walter grinned. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Yeah, you are. But it wasn't just April who changed. Walter changed too. Garrett noticed it first. He cleaned out the garage this morning, Garrett whispered one day as they stood in the kitchen. April blinked. He did? And folded laundry, and tried to fix the broken screen door. April peered down the hallway and watched her father asleep in the armchair, a screwdriver resting beside him. She smiled. He's trying. Garrett nodded. He's more than trying. On Sunday, April took Walter to the farmer's market in town. People turned, whispering, some recognizing him vaguely from years before. April held her head high. They passed the stalls of fresh peaches and jars of honey, and stopped at an old man selling hand-carved wood pieces. Walter ran his fingers over a small, sanded jewelry box. This reminds me of something I made back in shop class. I gave it to your mother the night I asked her to move in with me. April opened the lid gently. Inside was a small velvet lining, empty but full of promise. "Let me get it for you," he said. She blinked. "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to." She didn't argue. He paid in small, folded bills. She took the box and held it close. "Thank you," she whispered. "Maybe someday you'll keep something special in it," he said. April looked down. "I already have." And she thought of the brooch, the one that had reopened every locked door in her heart. The one that now sat on her dresser, no longer a symbol of pain, but of reunion. Later that evening, as the sky turned purple with dusk, Walter walked out to the porch and found Garrett repairing a loose railing. "You're good with your hands," Walter said. Garrett glanced up and grinned. "Learned from YouTube. Not quite a mechanic, but I manage." Walter took a deep breath. "I wasn't much of a father, but you're a good man. I see how you look at her, how you protect her." Garrett set the drill aside and leaned against the beam. "She's stronger than she thinks. Always has been." Walter nodded. "I want to be part of her life, if you'll let me be." Garrett looked him in the eye. "You're already part of it." And the two men, so different and yet bound by the same love, stood in companionable silence as the crickets began to sing. The early summer air was warm, humming with bees and swaying branches, as April stood barefoot in the backyard garden, her hands brushing over newly planted herbs. The small jewelry box her father had bought her now rested on her windowsill, holding the brooch that had once been a key to a forgotten life. It had been nearly 6 weeks since her wedding, and since Walter came back into her life. Each day since had been a gift, a little softer than the last. Stitched with shared meals, quiet understanding, and the mending of a bond that time had frayed but not severed. Inside the house, Garrett was assembling a swing beneath the old oak tree. Walter stood beside him, reading the instructions aloud, though they both ignored them half the time. April watched from the kitchen window, smiling. "You two look like a sitcom," she called out. Garrett looked up. "We're aiming for functional comedy." Walter smirked. "Don't worry, it won't collapse, probably." April stepped outside, a lemonade in each hand. "Here," she said, handing them the drinks. "In case you forget how to hydrate in the middle of all your engineering." They sat down together on the back steps, the swing half assembled but stable. "I was thinking," Walter began, "about moving closer, maybe getting a small place a few blocks away. I don't want to intrude forever." April shook her head. "You're not intruding, but if it makes you feel better, we'll help you find something nearby. A home, not just a roof." Walter looked down, quiet for a moment. Thank you. The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves above them. I missed so much, he said. Your birthdays, your graduation, the first time you drove a car. I can't get those days back. No, April said softly. But you're here now, and we still have the days that remain. She reached for his hand, and he gripped it tightly. Garrett stood and walked toward the swing again, giving them a moment alone. You know, Walter said, I've been thinking about fixing up old cars again. Maybe even opening a small shop. Nothing big, just enough to stay busy. April looked at him, proud. You should, and maybe you can teach Garrett to finally change his own oil. He laughed. Deal. That night, as twilight draped the sky in soft gold and lavender, April opened the little wooden box and took out the brooch. She turned it over in her fingers, tracing the curve of the metal, the tiny chip in the glass. It wasn't valuable, not to anyone else, but to her, it held the entire arc of a life. Loss, search, reunion. She pinned it to her sundress and walked outside. Walter was already sitting on the new swing, gently swaying, watching the stars come out one by one. You wore it, he said quietly. April sat beside him. It's not just jewelry anymore. What is it then? She smiled. It's the moment everything started to heal. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, faded but intact. April recognized it instantly. She was 5, sitting on her father's shoulders, both of them laughing. I carried this with me through everything, Walter said. Every city, every job, every mistake. I thought I lost it, but it always found its way back to me. April took it gently, her eyes misting over. We did too, she whispered. And under the watchful stars, they sat on the swing together, no longer bound by the pain of what was lost, but lifted by the quiet, powerful love of what had finally been found. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.